Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson over there, and we're getting to the tail end of June here. Nebraska has wrapped up their official visits for the month, a very busy month between the official visits, camps, a lot to kind of go through, some roster additions. Matt Rule talked last week as well. There's been no shortage of things to discuss. Brian, how are you doing? Have you caught your breath yet?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, I always think of it like when I was in college, I was working at a welding shop, and, it was really like it was 115 degrees with your earplugs in. So this is good in comparison. I mean, we're writing about sports and guys making visits. I will never complain. I actually like when it's busy. It's kind of nice when you have like stuff like right in front of your eyes, like, okay, this kid got an offer, this guy's, committing, whatever. It's good. It's better than past Junes, actually, where you're just like, oh, I'm going to do a list on, the 5 backup offensive linemen who could make a difference for 10 snaps, so I'll take this.
Hey, don't knock the list. That's
no, I like those. No, those are happening as well.
We got about 10 days of lists coming at the start of July. But
most indispensable Huskers, yeah.
Yeah, the indispensable Husker list is coming up. There will be still commitments coming up with the new the emphasis the last couple of years on June visits. It seems like early July is when everybody decides they want to pop in and commit. So let's just kind of take a slow walk back and discuss some of the official visits from this past weekend. It was a big visit weekend for Nebraska. Kind of a mix of current commits, guys that have been in the class and are pretty well known to people. Some other guys that I would say are kind of more towards the top of Nebraska's target list for what's left out there. A couple guys kind of rise immediately in my attention. You talked to Will Hawthorne, an outside linebacker edge out of Iowa. He officially visited this weekend, camped at Nebraska as well. What can you tell us about that situation and kind of where things stand coming off the visit as he kind of gets closer to a possible decision?
I can tell you he was really impressed by Nebraska, and so was his family, because he spoke about how just the support around that program is unmatched. And, sometimes guys just throw out words, but it felt pretty genuine. I think he's been on kind of a Nebraska high the last couple of weeks because, like you said, it wasn't just this visit. He got the offer camping here pretty recently. So he sort of had his recruitment really pick up steam since January, and his Power 4 options sort of have a few more opportunities for him since the last 3 weeks, really. The thing about him, as those who follow recruiting closely know, is he's basically from Ames, Iowa, almost. I mean, he's like right on the doorstep of it, and Iowa State is right there in the running. And so there is that part, is that, the program that he's always been attached to, maybe, is that, do they have the edge? All I can say, though, is Nebraska has definitely given him something to think about. He really digs Rob Dvorak, and just like his note, like he said, he's just a guy. Like he's the same guy recruiting you as he's going to be coaching you. He talked to the players about that. He liked that feedback he got. I think he really vibed well with the commits who were visiting that weekend, like Caden Vermoss. They have a mutual friend, and they're going to happen to see each other at Okoboji on the 4th of July. And so there might be a little bit. Yeah. That's kind of a Midwestern, like he said that, or both of them talked about Okoboji on 4th of July. I was like, oh yeah, of course. So there might be a little peer recruiting going on beneath the fireworks there. So who knows? Maybe something will change. It sounds like most of these guys, there's a decision probably a couple weeks away, and it seems like it's between Nebraska and Iowa State. I like, though, about him, Bruntz, he's one of those guys who doesn't have a problem saying he feels like he was under-recruited. Just feels like he's better than some people out there who are getting other offers earlier on. He has very high belief in himself. Very smart guy, has offers from like all the Ivy League programs. So definitely seems like he'd fit well here if he ends up picking the Huskers.
Yeah, and the edge recruiting and linebacker recruiting is kind of interesting. You have Christian Jones from Omaha West Side right down the road, still sifting through offers and making visits. He was at Oklahoma this past weekend, visited Nebraska the weekend before that, Auburn. So there's a lot of, I think, kind of big fish still out there in terms of linebacker options for Nebraska there. And Hawthorne's interesting too, just because, the camping aspect and, kind of earned it, I think,
Right.
with Nebraska and backed it up. So another kind of success story, I guess, for Nebraska of bringing a guy in, kind of running him through the paces and seeing if he fit what they were looking for.
Yeah, you've had the Dawson Merritt wheel spinning around, the Christian Jones wheel, but you just got to keep recruiting. And I don't think they feel they're taking a step back with Will Hawthorne and just like his potential at that spot. So definitely a guy they're interested in. Who else stuck out to you this weekend? I know you caught up with Bryson Weber.
Yeah, no, he's an interesting one. Bryson Weber's a 3 or 4 star corner out of Texas, kind of depending on which service you go off of. An interesting athlete. He's 6'2.5", run 185 pounds, and he's a legit 10-500 guy. Like the speed, he's rangy. Started his career as a wide receiver, moved to cornerback, and it was around that time that Evan Cooper jumped in with an offer. It was one of the first for Nebraska, or one of his first offers was Nebraska. Once he made that change, and things kind of blew up from there. And I think that initial offer and that initial kind of confidence in what he could be down the road had kind of put Nebraska in a good spot for him. And they have not relinquished that spot either. Got into a little bit in kind of how Nebraska sees him ultimately developing at the college level in a story on the site that's available to check out there. I'll leave that at least to there. But he's another one of those guys that goes home. He's not going to Okoboji to mull it over. But, Nebraska, TCU, and Utah are the three that he's kind of going back and forth over right now. He also visited Oregon State and Baylor in his official visits. But I think Nebraska's in a good spot there. He told me he's looking at maybe, getting to a decision pretty quickly. He's kind of said at the latest July 6th, which was a very specific date. But, I think a guy that, Nebraska is definitely getting the benefit of the doubt by offering early. TCU, he's got a lot of friends and teammates that are going there and headed there. So that's out there as well. But he was one that certainly stuck out because I think he fits to a T how Evan Cooper wants to recruit defensive backs and just their versatility. Was there anybody else that kind of stood out to you from the weekend? Jeremiah Jones and Chase Lofton were two I had on my list.
Jeremiah Jones is I'll be honest, kind of a mystery man to me a little bit because I haven't caught up with him yet. I know he had Nebraska on his visit list though for a while. Like it wasn't like that just popped up the week of, because he told our Louisville writer he was planning that like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And so this has been a relationship that has been building is the point of all that. And he's a freak athlete. Like, I mean, you look at his tape, but also just like his numbers, like he's played basically every position. He's like one of those guys, 6'5", 215 there's kind of varying listings on him, but that's sort of one people settle on, I think, is like 6'5", 215. Could be a safety guy who moves up into the box as a linebacker. He has wide receiver, tight end potential. I know Florida State had him in at a camp and worked him exclusively at tight end. It seems like maybe Nebraska's maybe more defense oriented with him. But again, with Nebraska recruiting, I sometimes don't get all caught up in worrying about that right on the spot, Bruntz, because we've seen like they'll take guys like him, get him on campus if he commits, and you test him out spots. You kind of see where he definitely fits the best, and you can move once they're here. But just a do-it-all guy who's got freak athleticism. I'm surprised he doesn't have more offers, actually. It seems like Nebraska, Louisville are kind of the ones in the mix here. But definitely an interesting guy to watch. And that offer could be that commitment could be around the corner too. So that's one to keep a watch on wherever he picks.
Yeah, even just, the fact that he worked out at Florida State exclusively at tight end. I mean, that kind of tells you the ability he potentially has as just can play anywhere. The fact that he has quarterback stats, I mean, he's a defensive player, a very productive defensive player. I mean, it feels like that was that's a guy you kind of get in your program and kind of figure out where it works,
Yeah, he was one of the best players at the Florida State camp too, as they reported. So that's not a diamond in the rough, as it said. We can get into that. That was an interesting quote from Rule last week, but he's not viewed as a diamond in the rough by Nebraska's staff, I don't think, at all.
A couple other guys that we can kind of get into this too. I mean, Nebraska's continued to add to their roster over the summer. Matt Rule even said that they would be recruiting for the 2024 roster probably right up to the start of fall camp on July 31st. They hosted Mekhi Nelson. Should we go there?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Mekhi Nelson was slated he's originally a class of 2024 prospect, originally from Pennsylvania, was going to do a prep year and kind of go through the process as a 25 recruit. Nebraska had been looking to get him on campus for an official visit. They finally were able to do so as a midweek, and he commits, is already on campus and reclassifying back to the 24 class. So he's going to be on Nebraska's roster for this season. What do you kind of make of that? And also, we can kind of get into a broader discussion about the running backs, because I think that warrants talking about, given that they didn't sign a scholarship back in the 24 class until this week.
Yeah, the thing I like about Mekhi is that, like any back you'd want in the modern day, he's not just your traditional back, or he doesn't see himself that way. And I don't think Brian Doan, who knows him very well as a recruit, does either. He's seen as a very versatile guy. Like, you could put out a receiver in space and he can make stuff happen. He's going to be a tough matchup that way. He really, I think, embraces those sort of challenges. Prior toward going to prep school, he had like 2,000 yards of offense his last season down in Pennsylvania. And EJ Barthel has known him for a while. He's like one of those recruits that he's been dialed in on, kind of just watching how it develops. And then Mekhi went to I think it was New Jersey. Was it the New Jersey Under Armour camp? And he tore it up. He was like the best guy there. And our people at 247 Sports sort of thought that, reported that. And Nebraska offered right after that. And then there was sort of, when you're on the outside looking in, people are wondering, okay, they got Jamarian Parker when he committed. Connor Booth is obviously in this class. Is that where it stops? But after you kind of figured out, okay, Mekhi could not only join it, but he could jump right in the boat this summer, get a head start this fall camp. You kind of see what he's about. You get more time to see what Quentin Ives and Dante Daldell can do as they go through a fall camp in the fall. I just think it's a good setup where they've got sort of this tiered system, right, Bruntz, where you have like the top three guys we think about are Emmett Johnson, Gabe Irvin, and Ramir Johnson. And then you've got somebody you hope can kind of show signs, even if they're not like one of the main guys this year, behind the scenes in Mekhi, Dowdell, and Ives, who I think it's important to mention. Rule, whenever Ives comes up, says, this guy can play. I really think he can play. Like they're standing by that idea just because we haven't seen him yet. So I think it's great that he's here, and it makes you feel a little bit better about the numbers in the running backs room. And then Maurice Mazuka is another walk-on I'd maybe throw in there, who got some good feedback in spring. So they've got some options. I was asked today to like sort of sum it up in a few words, what you think about their running backs. And I came up with, it's prove it time. I mean, that to me, like, you feel like you've got some guys that you believe can be something, and now at different levels in their career, they need to prove that. Like a couple of the guys at the top who we think are good, like one or two of them need to maybe prove they're great. And then you need somebody who's in this other class of younger guys to show like, I'm the next in line. I'm going to be there soon. In fact, I'm knocking on that door right now. So that's what needs to happen, really.
Yeah, and I think the way that Nebraska handles things in season, even if you don't see him for more than 4 games, or even if he doesn't play at all, I mean, I think you get a ton of benefit. I think there's more benefit to him basically being there and rolling through whatever scout team stuff in Nebraska is going to have him do at the college level rather than going the prep school route. I mean, and the other part of it too is from Nebraska's point of view, if you believe he's an offerable prospect, you want him on campus now. You don't want him to go to prep school, have a great year, and then all of a sudden you're in an elbows out recruitment for what, he might be able to show. So, I mean, I think in some ways it's, if you view yourself as a developmental program, I think there's, basically Nebraska saying, we're going to bring this kid in. We're going to let him lift, gain weight, gain muscle, get used to college football without the pressure of having to be the guy right away because of all the guys that you mentioned. I mean, I think for a lot of that running back picture in my mind, there's so many guys that you can say, well, they've done this, but there's always kind of that conjunction of like, okay, well, he's been injured or hasn't played a full season or, has struggled in this area or, didn't really take off. So, I mean, it makes sense to me where you're just stacking talent, flipping the roster, and having a guy that's been through a full year in a college program ready to go next spring, rather than kind of having to wonder who's going to be next or relying on those freshmen that are coming in. So I think that's the benefit there. There's, especially for running backs, I think kind of getting used to the college level against what's going to be a pretty good Nebraska defense. I think there's a lot of benefit there.
I need another year to see the backs this fall before I get too opinionated about like how they've recruited it and this and that. Like I really do. Because last year, when you think about it, I think they felt really good about their backs at the top. And then you get, punched in the stomach before the first month is out with your top 2 guys going out the same weekend.
Same day.
Yep. And then, I mean, that's tough deal for a coach. And then they did a nice job with Emmett. Emmett did a nice job always believing he was more than a backup. And I'm not saying Emmett Johnson's going to be Amir Abdullah. The story he has with his recruitment and stuff reminds me a little of Amir's in the sense that, of course, Amir came in with Braylon Hurd and Aaron Green. And, there was always like, it felt like Amir, I remember this because I would write about those 3 all the time, the offseason for their freshman year. Amir was always the 3rd name I mentioned, like in stories. It was like, oh, and there's Amir. And then like his freshman year, when he finally got a chance to return the kickoff, you're like, oh, that's interesting. He's got something. Then by the 2nd year, you're like, okay, he's the guy that's going to be. And Emmett, first year, he kind of had like Amir's first year where last year was some of that, oh, okay, there's something there. And now maybe there's an opportunity. I have an open mind about it, at least, for him to show that needle's still moving. And he wasn't maybe talked about enough, but he was an example of somebody who redshirted, and we didn't know like where he fit even at August last year. Maybe he's a 4th or 5th guy, and now he's a big part of the conversation. Use him as an example with like Dowdell, Ives, perhaps Mekhi Nelson, where maybe one of those guys pops up this year. Like, so it's too early to like, just because the whole spring wasn't like about Dante Dowdell or anything to say, well, that, like sometimes there's this quick, like, oh, that's not working or whatever. They didn't recruit well enough there. Let's give it a little time and see what happens this fall. But there is that prove it component attached to it. So I think you can balance all those things in your head.
Probably a group 2 that will benefit greatly from an improved passing game. Like some of the, I mean, Matt Rule hit on it last week, and there's a lot of truth to it. Where like some of the defensive looks that running game was getting last year, I mean, you would have really struggled to anybody would have struggled against that, let alone a team kind of struggling to find its offensive footing anyways. But that I think if you can kind of loosen things up a little bit with the passing game, that group is going to benefit greatly from that.
Yeah, if you're like go from a passing offense that was like 100 whatever 20th to 65th, that's going to do a lot for that running game. In fairness to the running backs, maybe we see a little bit more of what they can do if they have a little more space and there's not an extra guy or two in the box they're going against. So obviously got to prove that your passing game is rising up too, first of all. But that was one of the more telling quotes from Rule. It was the quote about how he thought they have the guys who can murder the defense over the top. It was in the context of like they've got the speed, like, if they can take the top off a defense basically. And if you have that, it should give some opportunities, I think, for some of these running backs to do a little bit more than maybe they did last year, but we'll see. We'll see how that all plays off each other. That short and intermediate passing game just needs to click a little bit better. And if it does, every part of the offense is going to look smoother.
Yeah. One more addition from the week that was, and then we'll take a quick break, and I want to get some hot takes from you after the break. But Jalyn Gramstad, the reigning NAIA Player of the Year from Northwestern College in Iowa, alma mater of Jack Mitchell, among others, is already in Lincoln, going through the process. Worked out at Nebraska's post-grad camp, another feather in the cap for that event, which they continue to pull guys out of. I feel like the opinions about this edition have varied very widely on what this means. What does it mean in your mind that Nebraska has added a veteran quarter? I mean, this was essentially the seasoned quarterback we've been discussing all spring that Nebraska would look to add, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think first off, you just needed a fifth body in the room. Like I think nowadays you need at least that many quarterbacks because you never know what a season is going to take on as far as if, last year we saw they're down to like the third guy. I know there's some people think like this is a conversation about a guy who can come in and fight for the backup job. I'd more start it like, it's okay if even he's like the fourth guy, like that's okay. Like that still fills a need. And I'm okay with starting at that level. And if he's really good and we're suddenly in mid-August, you're hearing the buzz like, oh, I'll tell you what, Gramstad picked things up fast and it translates here. Go with it. Like, that's a great story. I love the initial, like how this happened. I mean, that's just a great human interest story in the fact that he grew up a Husker fan, as you say, tore it up at the NAIA level. And then I think just wanted to say, like, I want to see what I can do in front of Husker coaches and like at that level. I want to see if it translates. And he had that conversation, even he told us with like his grandpa a couple weeks before. And it's just about like in life, sometimes going for it, and taking that chance, scratching that itch, seeing what happens. He showed up kind of on a whim and we wrote the story and it didn't happen right away, the offer and all the news. But I was hoping it did happen, like just from the story standpoint. So yeah, if he takes off and is like suddenly an interesting guy at some point in the season as a second or third guy, I'm all for it. And even if he's not, he's still a veteran guy who's, I think, going to be good for the freshman in the room who's played some college ball, even if it's at a different level. And that's all very useful. So he seems like a great add to the room no matter how it goes. And it's sort of like the backs. Let's just see how it plays out before. I'm not going to push like Harburg to the side or anything right now just because a guy showed up, a week ago and is just getting into the playbook, though. That's all I'm saying.
It's some of the discussion I've seen is that the addition basically moves Heinrich Harburg immediately to tight end, or that makes it more likely. I would not go that far at all at this point. Like I special packages maybe, but I don't see like a wholesale, like we're upsetting the apple cart because of this one addition. It feels like more of a depth piece to me.
I don't get why you wouldn't want to use Heinrich. Like, there's stuff you can do with him at quarterback that you can't do with some of the other guys, I think. The way he is as a runner, and I think he's improved as a passer too. So I thought Heinrich had a really good spring that encourages you about maybe his progress at that position more than anything. So I'm with you. I don't see this move as changing the QB room. I see it as adding another body and let him compete. And if it's proven that the new guy is like better than a couple of them, so be it. But you got to go earn it. And he's obviously going to have to play a lot of catch up to what Nebraska is specifically doing for these guys who have, Harburg's been in this offense a while and he knows some things. So, yeah, I look at it as Riola and Harburg are a nice 1-2. That's kind of sort of my opinion of the moment. And then we'll see if anything can tweak that at all.
One last thing on recruiting, and we'll take a break. It's that time of year where you're starting to see guys commit right after the last visit of June. That's pretty common. I think a lot of times those guys are kind of trending that way anyways when they make those visits. Nebraska, it's been a little bit quiet the last couple of weeks in the midst of all of that. I see a little bit of concern from fans about the 25 class, which I feel like that kind of naturally happens around this time of year if you're not rolling into commitments. What's your level of concern as we sit here on June 25th? Like, are you pushing the panic button or no?
No, I'm not, but fans should be fans, and that's okay to be like, okay, we had like John Mills, for instance, just committed to Texas. I thought John Mills was a really interesting recruit, like who I would have loved if Nebraska got, so there's guys like that who you see that you thought the Huskers could end up with that went somewhere else. And it's okay to be a little disappointed when it doesn't work out. I feel like O-line is more where that conversation's happening because there's been like 2 or 3 that have kind of went the other way. And I'm not panicked about it because I feel like they've been recruiting that position really well. They're putting themselves right in the mix for those guys, but they've also landed some too. It's not like they're just striking out. When you get like a Grant Bricks in the last class and some of the guys that they've put in there, that's a room that has some numbers, and they have some young guys, like your Sledges and your Gatulas and Justin Evans, who's coming up. And, those guys are interesting prospects that give you time if 1 or 2 guys doesn't go your way in this particular class or in this month to still come back from it and be fine. So I'm not too panicked about it. I also think there's probably a few who have maybe said something that showing they're probably coming to Nebraska that haven't been named yet as far as just recruits in general. So I think there's some good news on the horizon. And I don't know. What do you feel about it? I'm just not in that mode where I like how they're recruiting, I guess, in general. So it's hard for me to get too worried because I like the process they're taking with guys.
Yeah, it's the offensive line piece of it's interesting because you're recruiting on the backs of a class where you got Bricks, you got Preston Taumua, the number 1 player out of Hawaii, Gibson Pyle, who I think is going to factor
Jake Peters
sooner than later. They've really kind of like you were talking about with the running backs, where you have tiers. I mean, you've got the Benharts, you've got the Scotts, you've got the Prohaskas, the Mizukas that are older and have been around for a while. Not in Mizuka's case, but then you kind of have that next group of guys that have been in the program for a couple of years that you're hoping kind of take that next step and move into those starting roles. So, I think Nebraska's taken a little bit of a bigger swing on some of these guys too. Doug Utu, who visited Nebraska and committed to Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's the top 100 type recruit. Those types of guys, the group from Gorman, I think they've done some nice things with. We'll see if that bears any fruit. Ruggiero last year was another tackle that they added late. So it was a big class. And I think they're kind of trying to cash in on some of the relationships that Donovan Raiola has formed over the last couple of years. So I'm not panicking yet. I think there's going to be some commits rolling in for Nebraska in the next couple of weeks here. I think that's just kind of the nature of the calendar. But, I can see where, when you start seeing guys go elsewhere, you kind of hit the panic button. But at the same time, this is also a program where 80 guys on the roster are in their first 2 years in the program. Like they're kind of well into this roster flip here.
Yeah, they are. And we don't have to get all into this discussion, but you also got to be aware of if there's anything coming down as far as roster limits.
That's the next thing. Stop right there. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back and talk roster limits because I wanted to get your thoughts on that. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. I cut you off. Matt Rhule talked about kind of how you deal with whatever is coming down with the settlement and what that might mean for roster opportunities, or Nebraska still is among the largest rosters that's not a service academy in college football. What I guess, how much do you think Nebraska needs to be watching that, and how much do you think that is informing the way that they're going about these future classes?
I mean, I think they have to have a daily watch on it. And as Rhule said Thursday, he's in on the meetings. Troy Dannon's in on those meetings. So we get our info sometimes from a headline here, a headline there, someone who leaks something out. But as of Thursday, there hadn't been movement yet. He didn't know where it was going to land, basically. I think at one point in that quote said, I hope it's at least 120 as the limit. Obviously, even that would be a little bit hard on Nebraska because, as he said, it would be tough, to have that conversation with guy 123, or whatever, if you had to at some point go down to 120. My hope is that the big boys, those schools, and there are others like Nebraska that have rosters of 130, 135. Maybe they're not at 145, but they're up there. That they see the benefits that is for those kids to be in a program, and that they kind of stand up with each other and are able to have a big say in this. We're a little biased on the subject here because it's the walk-on piece, and having a big roster is sort of part of the fabric of Husker football. I mean, there's examples of many guys you've covered, I've covered, who at one point were number 128 on the roster. And then Justin Blatchford's batting down a pass against Penn State on third down, or Lance Thorell's picking off a pass. And I'm using all Pelini era guys right now. But John Bullock is going from nobody we were talking about to a single digit guy who is like, he better return, that sort of story is prevalent with Husker football. And it's even deeper than that. Like in this state, there's so much pride attached to like a town that has a guy that like he played at Nebraska from this year's, so-and-so played here, or he's on the team now, and like what that means. And also Rhule he understood it as a walk on himself at Penn State, but also here he calls it, I think, the Cornhusker value. He always uses Cornhusker, not Husker, which I like. It's that Cornhusker. It's that full, full word there. School. Yeah. That's like, these are the guys who, okay, a recruit just got in and he sees the dude who's like fourth on the depth chart, fifth team, and he's busting his tail just because he's like happy to be in the program and loves to be a part of it. And that does do something to your culture and is meaningful. Now, sometimes you have a class of walk-ons who are more meaningful than others and contribute more than others. But all these things, and it's not just nostalgia. I just think it's good for the game and for those players to have those opportunities to try to rise up if a university can afford them on their dime, or however, like What's the problem with it? I just don't see it. So I hope there's no changes, or I hope it's limited. I don't know how it's going to go. There's even examples, Bruntz, of guys who have walked onto this program and maybe like a Jeremiah Stovall or somebody who was like a late bloomer and he got something done on special teams, and then he gets an opportunity elsewhere. Maybe his career finishes somewhere else, or somebody, but it still like got going through that opportunity. So all this is kind of in my head, scrambled around up there as I think about it. And I hope it's at least 120 or more.
No, the Stallbird, the
Isaiah
Stallbird examples. Yeah, Stovall's another one. I mean, it's I think it's sometimes lost that those, like, it's not just a one-way transfer road. Like, you get guys going back to places like SDSU or Northern Illinois or somewhere like that, who won an opportunity and can play there. I mean, that's and you could say, well, do they really need to develop at Nebraska? Well, maybe not, but I mean that there's benefits to that. And I don't know about you, but it's the optics of it to me aren't great when you're adding more and more games to the season, and you're limiting the number of players that you can have on your roster at that time. It's not like if you're in the running for a college football playoff spot, and you can't just all of a sudden in November go and get guys off a practice squad. Like, who you have is who you have. And I mean, I think I know Matt Rule is thinking that way about, okay, if we're going to be playing 14, 15 games, you're going to need your third string guy or your fourth string guy at some point to come in and contribute. So I have not gotten the sense. I think they're very aware of it. I think they're very in the know about it, but I have not gotten the sense of them saying, like, look, we can't do this because this is what might happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would agree with that. I just think that they're, as he said, you got to be nimble. It's a time and age where different rules or stuff is going to come in front of you, and you have to be able to adjust. So you always got to be aware of what could happen or what might get thrown in front of you. And in the meantime, you try to be as fair as possible to everybody on your roster. And he made a good point also about, like, there's unintended consequences people don't think about, like a Demetrius Bell who's injured this year. And he was just saying there'll be programs, and I don't doubt this, that if there's certain roster stipulations or whatever with scholarships, they would just say, oh, that guy's of no use to us this year, cut him, basically. And that sort of stuff will happen. And so at least when they're doing this, they got to think about all those little things, and you need people who are on the inside and really care for these athletes to speak up and say, have you thought about what can happen if you do this? Because this could be the chain reaction of it. And also, as he pointed out, everybody always likes to talk about the NFL is a 53-man roster and all that, which it is. But he, as someone who knows, who coached in that league, he's saying there's basically 85 to 90 guys that you use throughout the year, even in the NFL, like, because you have your practice squad and you have guys that get called up when someone gets injured and all this stuff. So the numbers aren't as small in the NFL too, over the course of the long haul, as sometimes said. So I don't know. It's an interesting discussion. I'm sure some people would say elsewhere, Nebraska doesn't need a bloated 145 person roster. I could kind of get some of the arguments that could be made there. I'm coming at it probably from a really biased viewpoint, like of having just been used to that my whole life. And so I see more of the benefits than the cons of it.
Yeah. Well, and especially if there was the headlines today that they're probably going to be approving the additional analysts and coaches and on field type stuff too. So it's just an interesting approach if you're expanding coaching staffs and analyst roles and things like that, and limiting the number of players they can actually coach. Lastly, and kind of the run up to the release of things, EA Sports has been releasing various lists and things, and they came out today with the 25 most difficult stadiums to play in Not a real surprise that Kyle Field, Texas A&M, is number 1 on there. Did you have any quibbles with what was on there? The list of, in case you haven't seen it, top 10 was A&M, Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State, Wisconsin at number 7, Oklahoma, Florida State, Florida, Oregon, Clemson, Tennessee, Auburn, South Carolina. That's your top 15. They got Michigan Stadium right in my mind and not having it in the top 15. But Brian, what did you quibble with, and what school are we forgetting?
First off, thank you to EA Sports. This is like, hey, everybody who does podcast and talk radio in June, I know you're going to scuffle today. How about this? Here's an hour for you.
Here's 10 minutes of discussion, degenerates. Go for it.
How do you like Wisconsin at number 7, punks?
Yep.
So Nebraska did not make the top 25, by the way, which.
You okay with that?
Yeah, it's fair because it hasn't been tough because the team hasn't been tough enough. The environment would be. I tweeted or X'd or whatever you call it that like this is the EA Sports with the final, like kicking the pants to Nebraska, like get on the right track here, boys. Like there's some of that. Florida State at number 9 shows you that you could switch it like within a year or two, because if you think about Florida State, remember that, what was it? The gif of the meme of the guy, like reading his book, The Professor, in the top row,
the shirtless guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think you like that one.
I do. I use it frequently.
Yeah. That was Florida State a couple of years ago, and far worse than Nebraska has been, even in the lean times. So Nebraska could move up the list, and certainly with an 8 or 9 win season. And if they put like a big display on of like that Colorado game on September 7th, for example, I could see that shifting. No problem with them not being on there now. Wisconsin at number 7 is way too high. That's the jump around elevation of that. Like that, I enjoy that tradition. Just like everybody, I enjoy Madison. I enjoy the spectacle outside the stadium. When I think of Camp Randall, I think of the students filing in single file during the first quarter where the whole bowl is empty for about the first 10 minutes of the game. That's part of my thought of it. And I think of like some 11 a.m. games where I don't think it's as intense. I think it should be in the top 25, but not tops where it's at. The things they did get right, they had Michigan at 16 and Texas at 19. And that is good. Like, I give them a lot of credit for that because I'm surprised they had the guts to do it. Michigan Stadium's a great venue. Texas is a cool place. The crowds I do not find overly intimidating at the times I've been there. Now, they've waxed Nebraska a couple times, but we were there when Tommy Armstrong and the boys had a drive late and won 17-13. And even a game like that, I didn't just think it was like the most frightening environment. Michigan State being in the top 25 is the silliest look of them all, I think.
The woodshed. Are they sticking with that? Is that still a thing now that Mel Tucker's gone?
I'm guessing they're abandoning anything.
They retired the woodshed. The woodshed went to the woodshed.
Probably anything that was connected to that era is probably like, we're going to quietly kind of move those T-shirts off the rack, sell them for $3.
Yeah. Albertson Stadium, Boise State at 24. That was a little interesting to me. A little non-power 4 love there. And then I would have been okay if they've got Autzen Stadium at 11 for Oregon. I would be okay with that going just a slight bit higher. I would have been okay with that at like 8 or 9. I wouldn't have batted an eye. Like, even if you put Oregon at 7 instead of Wisconsin, I would have been okay with that. Yeah,
that'd be all right. I'd be all right with that. Mississippi State got in there at 25. Cowbells, I guess.
Yeah.
Respect to the Cowbells. Florida, the Swamp, when Florida's good, or, it's a game of matter, that is up there. Now, you could argue they haven't been good enough to, if we're just going by win-loss record and stuff like that, to warrant it. But Penn State, definitely, because you think of night games there and the whiteout. I have no problem with that. And if someone were to say, okay, you wise guy, you're picking on Wisconsin at 7, what's an answer to that? Oregon's a good one, but to show my fairness, I think Iowa has proven in recent years, yes, like at night games there, like they're going to give somebody heck. Like they can have like a big time top 5 team will come in there, and that's going to be a dogfight sometimes, because that's that type of environment. So I know that would annoy Husker fans to say that. I think Nebraska can vault ahead of Iowa with a good season or two. But right now, if you went off just the last 5 or 6 years and actually performing in like those sort of stages, I'd put Iowa ahead of Wisconsin. Actually,
sidelines are tight there, really tight. Yeah. This is probably a road trip conversation sometime around when we're passing through like Jacksonville, Illinois, on the way to Indianapolis. Give me is there a sneaky one in the Big Ten that's tougher than what most people would assume? Iowa's probably a good one, but is there another one that comes to mind?
Oh man, not offhand. I'm thinking through, like, it's not Purdue, not Illinois. Like, I think I'm not going to argue for Illinois. I'm just saying that Illinois, I've heard from players, like when it's a big game, like is actually kind of a little tougher environment. It hasn't seemed as like a real like hostile place to me when Nebraska's visited there. So they wouldn't be in there. Minnesota, like they have that student section sort of in the end zone. I think when Nebraska goes there, I think that's a tough road game. And I think Rule would say that from last year. I think they were a little surprised by like that environment, honestly, and how noisy it was. A lot of Husker fans tend to go up there, but Minnesota's probably a sneaky example. They shouldn't be in the top 25 or anything. But I would say they're one of those. Do you have one?
Iowa was going to be mine for what it is. Going back to the Big 12, it always, and maybe it was just because of the years that I covered games at Missouri were Callahan era, in late Solich. Missouri always seemed kind of tough to me.
Mean crowd, kind of.
They were a little angry down there, even during post game when coaches would have to come out and basically sit in the concourse while fans were yelling at them. But Missouri was one that kind of came to mind too, that it was a little bit tougher than maybe what you would have expected, just on the surface of things. Oklahoma State too, maybe just because that's another stadium where you're kind of down in the bowl. They got the paddles and they're beating on the walls and stuff like that. But those are the two that came to mind too.
If Nebraska's good, Nebraska's top 15 easily, I think, because some of the loudest stadiums or games I've ever heard, and this counts all the road trips, would be Nebraska, even when they weren't at their best. Like, I've never heard a stadium louder than the last drive Oregon had in 2016. After Nebraska took the lead, after the let me clear my throat and all that. That was insane. Like that, you could put it up against anybody. And if you go back and listen to the game, I think it's Brock Heward is the analyst. And you can tell, like, and he played at Washington, which was like, I mean, that's a noisy place. And he was just like, you could tell beside himself, like, man, this is freaking unbelievable how loud it is, like through his headphones. So Nebraska is a good year away from changing this list, I think, but they got to do it. Like, go win 8 games, make that Colorado game a memorable night, that sort of thing, and you're on the list again.
Yeah, Nebraska needs to be able to get to that, like, that level of like where there's like tension and anger, like the Texas A&M NCAA basketball tournament, for as little as that crowd was, there was a lot of hostility there. Like, you need to find that place more frequently, I think. Because I
don't mind it. I don't mind when I don't want them to be like insane, like Northeastern crowds, but like there's like a meet in the middle there.
Yeah.
You're right. The A&M, that was a crowd they booed A&M every time they came on the floor and stuff like that. Obviously, everybody thinks of the Miami game in 2014, where there was just like no forgetting like what this rivalry was and like what it's meant to people. Oklahoma, whenever Oklahoma showed up to Nebraska, even like in the like 2009 time, when they won like the 10-3 game Nebraska did at Memorial Stadium, you could always tell there was that age group of fan who it's like they saw that helmet on the field against Nebraska and it brought something else out of them. Like so it's in there for Husker fans. Colorado will be that way September 7th. I think it'll be one of the craziest like games like on any campus this year. I do. I think that environment, like if you just want to say top 10 environments this year, that one will be in the top 10. I would bet my Toyota RAV on it.
I was talking to a recruit a couple of weeks ago and said, are you planning to come back for a game? And he goes, obviously the Colorado game. I was like, yeah. He goes, I got to find a way to get to that one. So it's there.
I'm not encouraging this to happen, but if you were like a recruit who was kind of considering Nebraska, but maybe it wasn't going to end up that way, still, I'd be like, you know what? I'd like a pass for that one.
That's one you would probably just want to go to, just to, not advocating that again, but
no, we're not. I didn't mean it that way.
That might be a smart move on somebody's part. So, well, thank you to the folks at EA Sports for that 10 minutes of back and forth. Anything else we got to hit on? We're pushing up against an hour here, and I think
most people have finished. Most people have finished mowing their lawns by now, so that's probably all we should say.
All right, so let's push the mower back in the garage. We'll be back later in the week, I think, with another podcast, but plenty still to come over the next couple weeks. Decisions coming down the line. We're less than a month away from Big Ten Media Days already. Fall camp starts in 5 weeks. So the off season is quickly dwindling. We're getting close to single-digit weeks until the start of the season. So keep it locked on Husker 24/7 for all of your Nebraska news. We'll be back either later this week, early next week with another podcast. Thanks for listening.